Did you lose it?
Karen, we're going to start. Okay, we will call the Chino City Council and the successor agency to the redevelopment agency to order. The date is Tuesday, March 11th. I'd like to ask Councilman Lucio to lead us in the flag salute, please.
Please place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please note that all council members are present. First item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to our study session. Sewer policy for the sphere of influence and out-of-boundary service agreements evaluation. This item is an overview of the city's current sewer policy for the sphere of influence, including the process for evaluating out-of-border or out-of-boundary service agreements. Our staff report this evening will be provided by our Contracts and DIF Administrator, Sylvia Ramos, and our Director of Development Services, Warren Morleone.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. You may recall about several months ago, we had talked about the sphere of influence and then the sewer service policy. And at a
I think Channel 3 went blank. Okay.
I think we're fine.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you may recall, as I said, that we talked about it at the council workshop. And then one of the thoughts was, hey, we need to really look into this and before we make any determinations on it. So what we want to do is work on that policy in terms of the sewer connection policy. But with that said, we also ran into a condition with a business that was going to operate outside of the city in the city of Chino Hills, and they wanted sewer connections. So it got us talking about, hey, how do we treat that? And one of the things that the council wanted us to do is look into that also. So what we're going to do is have Sylvia give you a presentation to go through some of the things that we determined and we worked through, not only in terms of the staff level, but we also worked through it with the infrastructure committee. And what we would like to get from you is direction. After questions, work through some questions with you and get direction from you on some of the topics that she'll cover today, and then we can get a good idea how to move this thing forward. So with that, I'll give it to Sylvia.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Presented this evening is staff's proposed updates to the city's existing sewer connection policy for the sphere of influence, which also includes out-of-boundary service agreements. On February 25th, staff presented to the Infrastructure Committee proposed updates to the city's sewer policy aimed at enhancing flexibility in processing utility connection requests. The proposed revisions seek to clarify requirements, ensure infrastructure committee review, and align decision-making with economic development feasibility considerations. The committee supported staff's recommendation to develop a comprehensive, all-inclusive policy framework that standardizes utility connections requests within both the sphere of influence and also out-of-boundary agreements. This evening's presentation focuses on two key components: requests within the sphere and also requests for out-of-boundary service agreements with adjacent cities such as Ontario and Chino Hills. Let's start with the sphere of influence. The sphere represents the area where the city of Chino is expected to grow and extend municipal services in the future. The sphere is divided into two primary areas: the northern sphere in green, primarily designated for residential expansion, and the southern sphere in pink, envisioned for residential expansion with a mix of commercial and mixed-use developments. Please note that the City of Chino is the sole provider of sewer service in the sphere of influence, and there's only a small portion in the sphere that actually provides water service in that area. This means that the majority of the utility-related requests the city receives pertain specifically to sewer connections. Before discussing the current sewer policy, it's important to understand how the City of Chino has adapted its approach to balancing policy consistent with the need for flexibility. Over the years, the city's sewer connection and annexation requirements have evolved. At times, annexation was mandatory before connecting to the city's sewer system with no exceptions. Other periods allowed connections with without immediate annexation, provided that the property owner enter into an irrevocable agreement with the city. These shifts reflect the case-by-case nature of sewer connection requests, sometimes requiring policy amendments for equitable decision-making. However, one policy has remained consistent all along, that all properties connecting to the city's sewer system must comply with the General Plan and Zoning Code to ensure alignment with long-term land use planning. While rare exceptions have been granted when both the city and property owners benefit, such as constructing a new sewer line that serves multiple properties, these deviations are carefully evaluated to ensure a broader public benefit and consistency with the city's planning goals. Now let's review the current sewer policy and how it applies to properties within the sphere. Number one, they're pretty straightforward. Parcels not adjacent to the city's boundaries, the owner can simply just enter into an irrevocable agreement to annex to the city. The process is relatively simple. The city processes the application to LAFCO, and the agreement gets executed, and then they're ready to connect. Parcels that are contiguous to the city are required to annex unless it's deemed infeasible, meaning if a single-family home comes in or a tenant improvement or a small development, it's not really economically feasible for that property owner to absorb all those costs. It's very cost prohibitive, so that would be a reason that we would allow it to be infeasible. Also, with a development project where there's not sufficient support for the annexation, that would be another reason that the city would also deem it infeasible. Number three highlights the compliance with the General Plan and Zoning Code. As stated, that's always been, through time, always been in place where the city wants all projects coming in to adhere to the general plan, setbacks and height requirements in order to connect to the city's public sewer. Just to give you a note that any projects coming in through the county through entitlement, the city has the option to review those projects and make notes and actually give written comments. Oh, sorry.
Can you turn the volume up? It's not as clear here, hearing. Is there anything you can do on that, Natalie?
Oh, sorry. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Is that better?
That is
okay.
better.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. So bullet number 3, compliance with general plan and zoning code. So all projects that come into the city have to adhere to the general plan's requirements and setbacks and heights. However, it's good that the county, when projects come in that are fairly sizable, they give the city the option to review and actually provide comments back to the applicant. So if there's any thing that's not in compliance, we make it clear to the county and the applicant that if they come back later to obtain sewer service, that they will not be allowed to connect. So we make sure. And then also, bullet 3 also has an exemption for accessory dwelling units. So if an ADU comes in, they're not required to connect, even if there's a sewer line fronting their property. The state law, there's a lot of restrictions. So if they can utilize the on-site septic system, they do allow that. So we just give them an exemption for that. So this slide shows in red all of the properties and parcels that have actually executed an agreement in the past and current. I've only been processing the agreements for about the past 5 years, and I think we've approved about 15. So starting the second part of our discussion this evening is out-of-boundary service agreements. As Warren stated, there is no written policy for these types of agreements currently. Out-of-boundary service agreements specifically apply to areas outside of the sphere, including the cities of Chino Hills and Ontario. These agreements allow the city to extend services such as sewer, water, and storm drain beyond the city's jurisdictional boundaries. These agreements are pretty infrequent and are on a case-by-case basis. They are typically utilized in cases of emergency services or when no alternative service provider is available, and these agreements are more prevalent in older developed areas and along the city's borders where jurisdictional boundaries intersect. There are two fairly recent requests that I'm going to highlight. One is a city development seeking sewer service from Ontario, and the other is Chino Hills development seeking service from Chino. So this slide shows the Vincent Temple project located on Philadelphia Street on Vincent Avenue, as shown on the slide. It's shaded in red, all-inclusive. This project was entitled in 2024 as tentative parcel map 20806. This parcel includes 2 lots. It's not shown on the slide, but pretty much the red square is divided in half into 2 lots. The cultural center will go on the north lot, and then the south lot will be vacant for now. This project is within a very congested utility corridor with master plan storm drains, gas lines, dual water lines, and Ontario's utilities. A sewer study was conducted in 2022 for the tributary area. Due to the limited development potential in that area, extending Chino sewer was not cost-effective to justify a full-scale sewer extension, and the projected flows from the remaining development was also insufficient to support pipeline feasibility. The recommended solution was to utilize Ontario's existing sewer system, minimizing infrastructure costs and improving service efficiency. Another example is Chino Hills. As stated, there is currently no formal policy governing agreements for sewer service connections outside of the city of Chino. However, the recent city council discussion regarding the agreement with Chino Hills to allow Prime Car Wash to connect to the city's public sewer was highlighted the need for one. Establishing a clear policy will ensure that the Infrastructure Committee has the opportunity to review and address any concerns before approvals are granted. It will also prevent applicants from assuming that water sewer connections are automatically included in will serve letters issued during the entitlement process, as was the case in the car wash that was just requested. Furthermore, staff recognizes the economic feasibility is a critical factor in infrastructure-related decisions. Implementing a formal policy will provide a structured framework for evaluating future requests, consistency, and equity. This leads me to my last slide. Staff is seeking direction on updating the existing policy to encompass all utility service requests, including those in the sphere and out-of-boundary agreements. This will entail updating the existing policy to include all service connections, only one policy. Some notable provisions within the policy will include, for the sphere of influence, that staff can evaluate on a case-by-case basis. And at the city's discretion, staff may approve deviations from zoning standards if a project is substantially compliant with the zoning code or demonstrates a substantial public benefit, including, but not limited to, building a significant sizable sewer line. At the city's discretion, the city can require sizable developments that aren't adjacent to the city's boundaries to, they won't be required to annex prior to receiving sewer or water service unless annex is deemed infeasible. So there's a whole section included in the new proposed policy that gives staff many ways to deem a project infeasible, which was outlined in the attachment to the staff report. And lastly, the Infrastructure Committee oversight. So all of irrevocable agreements to annex other than individual single-family home requests must be reviewed and recommended by the Infrastructure Committee before the ability to serve letter gets issued. Some notable additions for the out-of-boundary agreements include, again, case-by-case basis. Staff will conduct service feasibility analysis, requires sewer study. Also, staff will take into consideration the public benefit, enhancing sewer and water service efficiency, improving regional infrastructure access. and increases to even city's allocation of reclaimed water. Again, any out-of-boundary service agreement will have to go through Infrastructure Committee oversight and must be approved prior to any ability to serve letter being issued. And additionally, city will look at the economic considerations. Maybe there might be a future sewer line that goes in, maybe cost share in that sewer line, or other connection fees that we could help offset costs for such connections. That concludes my part of the presentation. Warren, do you have anything to add?
Nothing other than it's, for us at a staff level, it's been an important issue for us to deal with. There's been some inconsistencies or clarity issues that we've dealt with in the past, especially with the existing sphere of influence. You know, what does infeasible mean? What does deviating? Is there any opportunity to deviate? Because if somebody, like Sylvia had mentioned, comes in and if it doesn't exactly meet our development code, then there's an issue, and how do we work with property owners and developers to work through that? So that's one thing. And then developing that out-of-boundary portion of it is hugely important, because before that, you know what, the council had some concerns. We think we've resolved most of them by the information in there, and putting them together will help us move forward into dealing with property owners when it comes to these issues. The last thing I wanted to mention is that we did take it to the Infrastructure Committee. I know we'd mentioned that, but it's important to note that we did go to the Infrastructure Committee. We got some good guidance, and that's been implemented into the provisions that you see before you, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. We have two members of the Infrastructure Committee here this evening. I'd like to give you the opportunity to address this item before the rest of the council. Mark, you want to start?
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about when we talked about the out-of-boundary service agreements, especially when dealing with businesses, I told them that before we give anybody a letter to connect, businesses that are asking to annex should not be in direct competition with our current businesses. I have no issue with, let's say, a church that's out of boundaries wanting to connect. They're not in competition with anybody else. But I think, you know, just to save a business money by allowing them to connect to ours as opposed to the city that they belong to, it shouldn't be a good enough reason to allow them to do that. So I told them that I think that's something that needs to go in front of the whole council to make that decision, to look at it, weigh it, and make a determination. I didn't want to not have us be able to weigh in and just have staff be able to make that decision, because I think we need to have an opportunity to let our local business owners that come in and also have the opportunity to speak on something like that.
Karen?
Mayor, we discussed a lot of things at the Infrastructure Committee meeting kind of in preparation to come to this meeting today. So I agree with Councilmember Lucio's comments. From a historical perspective, I really do understand why the council for many years required the annexation agreement. It made a lot of sense for its era. But when you fast forward now, one of the things we discussed is we can't, with this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. For a lot of people sitting on our borders, it's not a matter of if some of these septic tanks are going to fill, it's a matter of when now. So what we asked our staff to do in some of these reviews is for them, they're all similar, but they're not the same. So they do require like some individual thought and not just a check the box, you know, giving our staff some ability to have some guidelines, but you know, just the hard line, no, if they won't annex and go to the county is not really feasible any longer, because it really puts the person who owns the house, I think, in a quandary between government entities. And when something like this is happening, that's not really what the resident or somebody wants to hear at that point. They want help resolving their issue. And I do believe that there's probably been incidents, even though I don't know one personally, where we probably told people no and they were forced to pump septic tanks until they could get resolution on it. So these are the guidelines we laid out for our staff. We asked them to bring back to the council. And with the out-of-boundary service agreements, I think that there are some more clarification due on this. These are some of the guidelines we provided, the ones that you see here. in the case that we're studying tonight, I do have like a sense of, question because of how it sits, how we decided whether it was going to be our sewer connection or Ontario's, so I'm willing to listen to staff on that. But I do agree, I think if a business or an entity, particularly a business, has another method of connecting to sewer and they want to somehow circumvent higher cost or a competition issue by working that angle, I don't think that's fair to our local business residents or our businesses. So these are some of the guidelines we provided during the infrastructure committee meeting for this body to discuss here tonight. So it's gotten more complex as time has gone on. It hasn't gotten simpler. It's gotten a lot more complex because water and sewer are complex things now as time has gone on. So that's where we're at tonight, Mayor. That's all my comments.
Okay. Chris, do you have any comments this evening?
Not at this time, Mayor. Thank you.
Curtis?
I do have a question, just a definition. Can you explain to our residents what the difference is between sphere of influence and out of boundary? Isn't the sphere of influence out of the city's boundary? And what's the difference?
The out-of-boundary agreements are with local jurisdictions, like Chino Hills. The sphere of influence, we're the only sewer provider in that area, so the county automatically defaults to the city to get a will serve or will not serve letter, and then we work with the applicant to connect them to the utility. So it's a little bit different. We don't enter into an agreement with the property owner, not a city. So the out-of-boundary is strictly like Ontario Chino Hills.
Well, you can still be in the sphere of influence and still want to connect to out of boundary.
Well, I think the distinction is just pretty simple. Annexation deals with sphere of influence
County
within
area.
the city, county area.
Everything
Out of boundary
boundary
is everything
other
else,
cities.
cities.
Any other municipalities?
So, right, you are the sole provider.
Just want to
in
make
this.
sure we got some clarification on that, because there were some people that had some questions about that.
So, Mayor, I do have one more comment about definitions as well. The term infeasible in that policy, it's what we would call in police work vague, ambiguous, and not clearly stated. So I think, and sometimes policy is written that way to give people judgment, right? But we did ask our staff to say, hey, what quantifies as infeasible? So we did ask our staff for some cleanup language on that portion of the policy as well. So.
Yes, Fred?
If I may, Mayor, I think Councilmember Comstock raises a good point about providing the council some flexibility. So to Councilmember Lucio's point about one of the things that may be important to a council member about competing businesses, perhaps at the time other council members may have other concerns or similar concerns. So the wording has been carefully crafted, I believe, to encompass any economic impact of the council's decision. So that could include competing with local businesses. It could include other factors that the council may consider, loss of sales tax opportunities, et cetera.
We also asked our staff when they came to this meeting tonight to really use critical thinking and a degree of common sense in the application of these policies. For me, the out-of-boundary, sewer connection by the applicant in Chino Hills, the most recent one we had, it didn't make sense in a lot of ways, right? And the council spoke on that. There's some that really may not meet our current policy, but when you look at the applicant or the situation, the policy is no longer serving some of our out-of-boundary sphere of influence people the correct way. And that's what I think we need to look at with the policy sometimes. I think we need to look at what is the legislative purpose of the policy and what are we trying to do and how can we best serve people in their time of crisis with these things while also looking out for the benefit to Chino, right, and the taxpayers and the people we're serving. There's a balance here. That's why we said this is not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. Sometimes it's very difficult. If it's in the city or too far out, it's not hard. It's when we get to these boundaries, it becomes challenging. So that was a lot of the discussion at the infrastructure committee meeting.
Well, in reading through this, I had a number of notes that I wrote down and questions. Excuse me, trying to catch a cold. On the car wash, that was a good example of some difficulties because staff gave the will serve letter and council objected because a prior business tried to go in that wouldn't have been competition because they already had a car wash there, and now all of a sudden a competitor wants to go in. So the council clearly stated no. So in reading this, there definitely is built-in ambiguity, definitely, and I can understand why, but that's also going to lead to some great areas where maybe staff and the council are going to be in direct conflict. As well, even the infrastructure committee may be in conflict with the whole council. So I think as we move forward, we're still going to have some awkward situations. So I think staff's going to have to be particularly sensitive to these items. For instance, I'm just going to go through on the different pages where I had notes. On page 14, under the sphere of influence sewer connection, the second bullet, city discretion for infeasibility determinations. City retains the right to deny connections based on feasibility constraints. And my question in reading it was, what constraints? You know, how are you going to define that so that it's equally applied to everyone? I don't think you can, because I think it's a case-by-case basis. So honestly, I don't think there's a way to word all of this so that it's going to resolve every issue. I think we're still going to have some areas. Next page, page 5, out-of-boundary service agreements when it comes to water and sewer connections. When it comes to fees, you know, if it's a big development, it's out of our boundary, and they need to connect to our sewer, and if it requires us to upgrade a line, then that development coming in is going to have to pay their fair share. Now, if we can't afford to upgrade that line right at that particular time, we bank the money, we pay for the upgrade later, it costs us more because of price escalations. So where's the fairness in that? How do we determine how we stay whole in those kinds of things? Or like the brine line, maybe a business comes in and needs to use our brine line, and in allowing that business to use our portion of the brine line, say it's a Chino Hills business or Ontario that comes in, and it uses up the capacity, that's taking away capacity for our businesses. How do we get the fairness in that? So I think we're going to come up against some situations that are not going to be easily resolved. See, next page, on page 6, all development within the SOI must conform to the city's general plan use and zoning requirements to qualify for sewer or water service. The problem is the county is not complying with our general plan. And so these things are coming in and they're not in compliance. Well, this item statement right there, number 1, we're going to be avoiding that right off the bat. The development that just is going in right now is not in compliance with our general plan. So I see right there where we've already got an incompatibility. So I think somehow that needs to be massaged a bit.
Can I comment on that before you go on, Mayor?
Yes.
We talked about that exact thing in the infrastructure committee meeting. And what we did was we asked staff, we said, hey, listen, we know that it's going to be almost impossible because of the county's policy with what they approve. But what we did say to them is like, try to get them as close to compliance as possible, right? Because when we do annex it anyway at one point, we want it to be as close to compatibility with us. So there was some discussion about that, but you are, with everything you're saying, you're 100% correct. Some of those things were discussed. You are spot on with that.
Well, they're not. They're never. I'm sorry.
You're correct
about that. But
yes.
They're never going to comply with our general plan.
Yes.
We may be able to force compatibility with street widening, things like that. But the county blatantly is just doing what they feel they want to do, even though we've had conversations about working together to do a general plan in that area that's going to match. I don't see any improvement on that, and I don't see any movement on that.
We all saw, yeah.
You've had meetings.
Yeah, we all saw that was like just lose almost all the way around. Because at one point, when they do annex into the city, it could be down the road, it's still going to be not conforming with our general plan. So it doesn't, what we said was try to get us the best the closest to it as possible.
But that statement, the city's general plan
Right.
land use.
Yes, yeah, I get it.
So if I may, Mayor, you could see, I'm sorry. The following provision at section 1.12 says, at the city's discretion, staff may approve deviations from zoning standards. That could be broadened to also say general plan requirements and zoning standards, if that's the desire of the council.
I think it needs to be massaged a bit.
You could simply add that
Yeah.
word, general plan requirements and zoning standards. Now, that probably doesn't give staff as much guidance.
Well, again, I don't think, Warren, I think it's impossible to give you exact guidance on this.
Yeah, and I want to explain a thing with you, Mayor, and the council. So in the past, when we've annexed property, there's the two that we've just done. There's no way majority of that meets any of our standards.
Right.
So how do we annex it and provide services in the future if it doesn't meet ours? So what we did as a city is we understand when we annex, we're taking what it is, whether it's a code issue or a project that doesn't meet a standard or some other issue. We as a city determine, hey, we want to annex the property, we're taking it in. So that's the way we've always approached it. Now, what we've run into problems is a developer coming with a vacant property they want to build. Then we have the ability to say, hey, you need to meet every standard or we as a city will not give you sewer service. Because to your point, Mayor, you're absolutely right. Because there's many that don't meet standards that currently exist if we take them in. It's all for all the new ones. So we've made it a point moving, as staff would look at the projects moving forward as new projects. But to your point on here, we've been very careful in massaging the language because general plan to me means density. And I don't want to say there's ability for staff to say you can deviate from the density. That's not my role. You've already told us you don't want to deviate from the density until we do that specific plan or that master plan in the sphere. So that's why we clearly just put deviate from zoning standards. It doesn't give them any ability to mess with density. It only allows staff to deviate. Like, for example, somebody comes in and through the county, they don't meet one setback that may be a few feet off. We in the past said you can't come in. We're not going to give you sewer for a setback because it doesn't meet every standard. What we've tried to do is say, let us work through it with staff, and if it's minor, we can do it. If it's major, the infrastructure committee said, hey, bring it up in front of the committee. If it's a major change and you feel uncomfortable about it, let us talk globally about it and make sure we make the right determination.
But see, Warren, my point is, though, when you read that sentence, all development within the SOI must conform to the city's general plan use and zoning requirements to qualify for sewer or water service.
Yeah, we were thinking, Mayor, that it would be, unless the second one, you can deviate, but it's not worded well. To your point, we need to reword it.
Yes, number one needs to be reworded because
Right.
you're never going to comply with that.
Because we were thinking that it would go to there, and then if it doesn't meet there,
Doesn't
you have
say
a
or.
deviation right.
It doesn't say or.
I guess the question is, does the council want to allow potential deviations from the general plan, land use and zoning requirements? Because right now it just
Council needs
says,
to be involved in that. I don't want staff getting sideways with council. You know, if there's a proposal coming in, staff needs to make sure that the council is comfortable with whatever it is. Now, if the county has overridden us, like they've just done on that property where we had no say in it, right? We tried to do what we could, but they clearly went ahead and applied or approved what that developer wanted to do. I get that. But I don't want someday to come back and find out that our staff said, oh, you don't have to do half acres, you can do 4.5 or whatever, when the council has not been involved in that. Because then that makes us sideways with our own constituents or potential constituents.
so then if the council wants to direct those changes to actually allow deviations from the city's general plan, land use and zoning requirements, in addition to zoning standards, essentially all applications that fail to meet the letter of the zoning standards or general plan or zoning would go to the infrastructure committee and then the council.
I would say so, yes.
I agree with that.
Yes. Otherwise, again, then we get sideways with our own constituents. And then also, we're blindsided when someone comes to us and says, you just approved, or your staff just said they could build that, and we know nothing about it.
This was the discussion we had, Mayor. It's hard for them to come up with that exact language, but yeah, you're correct. We told them the same thing. Get it as close to these things as possible, but, you know, there's, yeah.
And then the other question that I had on item number C, when it comes to ADUs, It says they'll be exempt from annexation requirements when seeking sewer connection. Why would an ADU seek sewer connection if the main house doesn't seek a sewer connection? Why would you ever do that?
We've run into instances where, for example, the existing home may have on a septic and it may be maxed out, and they need to have a separate sewer connection for that to allow for the ADU, but it doesn't require it. And the other thing too is that we can't do any modification to that language because state law allows them to deviate from any standard that the city would.
I
And I'm,
understand, but my point is, if they're gonna come and want to go on the sewer, wouldn't there be a way for us to encourage the main house to also, I mean, it makes no sense to have one on the septic and one on the sewer.
Right.
I can speak to that. So when people come in with the county automatically notifies the applicant they have to come back to the city to get a will serve or will not serve letter. At that time, if somebody's building an ADU and there's a sewer line in the street, 9 times out of 10, the single-family home is also connecting to the public sewer. So it's typically when ADU seeks an exemption, it's when they have sufficient septic capacity to service that ADU, and it's cheaper to do it that way, and they don't want to connect. So we get all different scenarios, but
I understand
yeah.
the exception. I
Yeah.
get it. I understand the exception. What I'm questioning is if they want to go on the sewer, it should be the units on the property should all go on the sewer, not just the ADU.
Yeah, and we were just talking about, I agree with you. We can definitely encourage it. It's up to the property owner whether they have to, pay the cost to hook up sewer for the main house, even though the ADU's doing it. And then, like I said, there's been instances where the septic has been maxed out. They can't do any more with the septic, so they kind of have these two systems. But we can definitely encourage it when people come in that, hey, take the opportunity to hook up to sewer if you need to.
Well, on our sewer study, we have to take into consideration all possible ADUs and every unit within our sphere and current boundary being on the sewer. So you have to count all of that sewage anyway. So that was just something I noticed. I thought that makes no sense.
I'm wondering if they're doing it, some of these people that are building ADUs and automatically making them rentals, that maybe it's more attractive for them to have it on a sewer as opposed to a septic tank, and that's why they're doing the ADU, but not maybe their home. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that you would want to have all of them done, but that might be one of their cost things that they might be looking at.
And depending on where the structure's at, Fred, do you know if we can actually legally mandate the house to come on to the septic? I don't
So
think with the housing laws that we can.
So I think Warren used the words very carefully. We can encourage, but
Right.
we can't deny an ADU if the owner decides he won't pay for the connection to the house as well. So
So I would ask our
Your
staff if
outcome.
there's a way to, if you're saying, Sylvia, like 9 times out of 10, that they're coming onto the sewer, that's great. If we have that 1 or 2% that isn't, if there's a way for staff to incentivize them somehow and bring it to council, maybe that's the time to incentivize somebody while they're doing it to do it, right? Like, what are the incentives we can do? Because the only reason they wouldn't do it, let's face it, is cost, is money, right? So let's look at those on a case-by-case basis. That's why we said these are case-by-case, right? They're all similar, but they're not the same. And see if we can somehow incentivize that resident to change at that moment.
I have another question. When it comes to hooking up to the sewer, IUA has a fee that they charge. Now, we're not allowed to charge an ADU a hookup fee, but are we going to get charged by IUA when the ADU hooks up?
No. So the ADUs are not subject to the SDF fee, and the city does not offset any costs associated with the connection.
So IUA will not be billing us.
No.
Do they have to upgrade the piping from the ADU that taps into the house and then out to the street?
Again, it's just a case by case. So when they tap into the line in the street, they have to pull the approved plans and then show the revision and connection. So it goes through plan check and whatnot. So a lot of times they do have to upgrade on site and then make the connection to the sewer line in the street if they're connecting.
Because some of those pipes are going to be so old, or it just depends, right? Some are going to
Yeah.
be clay, some of them are going to be,
Exactly. So
Yeah.
when they start messing around.
No.
you're gonna have an issue.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and I'm sure if Hajan was sitting up here or Albert was sitting up here, we never contemplated as a city ADUs, right? So we develop our infrastructure based on the density and what we think is going to come out. ADUs, we're still noodling, how do we work through this to figure out long-term infrastructure upgrades up in the sphere, especially throughout the city, because we don't know we don't know how many ADUs are coming in and when they're going to come in, and that was never planned for. So, hey, Jen's team is noodling it right now. How do we plan for that, and how do we pay for the upgrades? So that's an issue that we never contemplated.
So if there is going to be an upgrade, are they going to be responsible for upgrading our sewer line in the street?
No.
I mean, if it's going to be more of a capacity than we're able to facilitate, wouldn't they be responsible for that?
One house won't be responsible for it, Curtis. You can't burden it on one homeowner.
Mayor and council. So when the state mandated, or state basically told the cities, we have to allow ADUs, they never considered what kind of impact we're going to have on sewer capacity. So and even when we did our sewer master plan update in 22, we did not anticipate including ADU calculations in that. We ran some quick numbers. Since 2019, we have permitted 124 ADUs. And that's not even including the granny units that are already existing. So we already have ADUs, what we used to call old granny units. So in order for us to move forward in accommodating for future ADUs for the city, staff is programming a master plan update, sewer master plan update that includes ADU and what kind of impact it's going to have downstream. ADUs are like another small house. And every time you have a smart house connection, we actually collect a small fee for that. But now IUA even said they have no idea what kind of impact that is going to have on their treatment plant. So they construct RP5, they think it's plenty big, but ADU was not part of the calculations. They just consider a full build out of whatever the regular housing it would have been.
And there's no meters, right? On
No
the
meters
sewage?
on sewers.
One thing can be for sure, Mayor, is the impact will be more costly.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it'll fall on the city. It's not going to fall on the
That's right.
individual homeowners.
State basically told us we just have to allow it.
Well, and it's going to impact our water system too, and there's no way to measure that as well.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, and urban water management plan. When AUA looks at all of that, our numbers are nobody ever complies with their exact numbers.
Correct. It's
No
just an
matter-
estimate.
And we always overestimate, and then they always come in under. So, exactly.
Yep. We are in the process of doing urban water management plan update every year that ends with a 0 and a 5. We have to update our urban water management plan, and we will address that as a part of our update.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. But one benefit is ADUs does provide additional recycled water credit because they do contribute to the sewer system.
How do they meter that? How do they monitor
They
it?
don't meter it. It's calculated as a part of equivalent dwelling unit number.
So it just comes off the property? Okay.
Yes.
That's another question that I had when it came to the calculations of reclaimed water. Especially on out-of-boundary services, how in the world are we going to calculate what kind of credit we need to get for recycled water if we allow connections outside of our boundary? And then vice versa, like the temple on Benson Avenue, I'm sure Ontario's going to want to count that for their recycled water. How in the world do you do those calculations?
They have a standardized plumbing fixture count, and they have, depending on the type of businesses, they have a calculations on how strong the waste is and what kind of treatment it's going to require. So that's where the EDU comes in, equivalent dwelling unit of a regular residential home. So they consider waste strength based on just like a regular home, shower, laundry, and just regular usage of your toilets, that's what they consider as a regular sewage. And then industrial use, any like car wash, they have a separate calculations for what the equivalent dwelling unit is,
So will
EDU.
we be providing those numbers too, like Ontario? And subtracting the recycled water away from us and giving it to Ontario, or does it just go into their calculation?
It just goes, if it's draining into their system, they get the EDU calculation or their credit.
Okay, Infrastructure Committee oversight. So that the council doesn't get sideways with our own committee, when they have to ratify something or come up with something, how is the council going to be notified of what's going on? Because we don't get regular reports on committees.
So the initial presentation would be to the Infrastructure Committee, and then upon receiving feedback, we would bring it to the City Council for approval.
As an actual item, an action item?
So typically, it would require an agreement, whether it's out of boundary, so it'd be similar to what the process was for Chino Hills, and or if it's in the sphere, and it's a larger project, it would come back as a irrevocable agreement to annex. So it would get to the City Council. Once we issued the ability to serve, then they would go through the final steps, and then we would enter into the agreements, whether it's out of boundary or
Okay,
a sphere.
but if you've already initially provided the will serve letter, and then the committee says no, you've already told them yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right now, it's will serve, and that's where we're getting ourselves into trouble. We're going to call that ability to serve. So whoever that person is, we have the capacity, we can serve you, but then we're looking for authority through the Infrastructure Committee to the council to say, yes, we want that, because that's where we got into trouble.
So you're going to reword that agreement?
Yes,
Because
yes.
now it's a will serve, which is.
That's right.
We're committed.
That's
Okay.
right.
And I think the other part of that too, Mayor, is I think every person that's on a committee like of that nature, you know, we have the responsibility in serving on that committee to make sure we're representing all the views of the council, not just the two people saying like, hey, here's my perspective. I also know that this could be a concern, you know, coming from the council. And if there is, I think, staunch conflict there, you know, that we, you know, that staff can report that, you know, as you know, on the report out to the council prior to the meeting.
Right.
So,
Well, I think staff has
because
a
we're not all going to agree
responsibility.
with on all those things. right?
Staff has the responsibility to make sure the decisions of the committee comes to the whole
Correct.
council.
It has to.
Yeah, I agree. And then my last comment was very last page, page 3, number 6. City cost participation for connection fees. The city shall contribute its fair share of connector fees for necessary sewer or water infrastructure improvements. Why would we have to contribute a fair share to something that was provided to out of boundary?
That actually could be reworded. So so for example, when I talked about the city entering into an agreement with the City of Ontario, there might be some cost provisions in that case, and then vice versa. So if we enter into an agreement with Chino Hills, there might be some costs associated that would be outlined in the agreement. So it's interchangeable. It goes either way. So moving forward, when we enter into these agreements, we're going to look at the cost feasibility and if there's any cost share associated. So it's just whichever city's connecting to infrastructure would be the one that could possibly pay towards that infrastructure. So it could be us or it could be them. So.
Well, one of the, and this has nothing to do directly with sewer, but one of the reasons why I'm sensitive to that is our storm drain coming down Euclid. I mean, we are accepting all the storm drain north of us, and yet it's a horrendous cost burden on us now to take that water from Merrill south, which I think is horribly unfair because that's not our water. That's water coming to us from all the way into foothills all the way down. And yet we're going to be burdened with the cost of handling a lot of that water. So I want to make sure we're not paying, if it's out of boundary and somebody has to use ours, we shouldn't have a fair share. They're impacting our system, they should pay. those are the comments that I have. Any other council comments? Chris, did you have anything? Mark? Kurt? Karen?
No, I think your comments were really good, Mayor.
Okay,
Mayor?
Yes.
I think, I just wanted to go through and make sure that we cover everything. Okay, sorry, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah. So just to make it abundantly clear, the council would like the opportunity to deviate from the city's general plan land use as well as zoning standards, so that flexibility will be expanded to cover places where potential property is inconsistent with the general.
with concurrence of council.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
council, so it would take staff, Fred, I'm sorry, so staff wouldn't approve it, the council would.
Right, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Fred, I think I would
I was
say
gonna
that the
get there.
legalese in that statement has to be specific so that, because if it's not specific enough, then you're going to get people who might say, well, it doesn't really say that, right? So I think there has to be like, hey, this is the goal, recognizing that that's not always attainable, right? Somehow, blah, 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 blah. But the goal is this, right? Because if we state it the other way, like, well, it's like this lofty idea, then it's like, well, then that's not really mandatory. So this is the goal, but in the event that this is not capable, we do something else. So.
Right. So then, going to the point that Warren was mentioning, the sort of at the end, I see that it says, infrastructure committee oversight, all out-of-boundary service agreements must be reviewed and recommended, it should say, to the council by the infrastructure committee. That's going to be broadened to apply to any circumstances where deviations are at issue. Does that encapsulate the feedback?
I don't know, I talked an awful lot.
No, I think it
Yes or
does,
not?
because it goes to the infrastructure committee, particularly if there's a deviation.
Right.
And that's just another public meeting where staff gets to get in front of a committee and council say, hey, here's some of the things I think that could be problematic prior to coming into the public meeting, so hopefully we can work out some of those things prior to it coming before the council. So we talked about that, and I think it's been a good practice for us, not just on the infrastructure, but other committees that we have adopted as well, so.
Right, and then I just want to add, so it sounds like to me, in terms of the infeasibility discussion that you brought up, that it's okay to work with a property owner based on the infeasibility monetary, if they think that, basically what it's outlined, if they think that they can't get the votes for annexation, that sort of thing, so we'll work with a property owner, so that's okay to move forward with that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is you'd mentioned, Mayor, at the very end, that provision, the cost participation, you wanted us to re-noodle that, just to
Yes.
make sure. So that's another one, Fred. It's page 8, number 6, we re-noodled the language on that. And I think those are my notes.
Okay, when you redo this, can you redline it and let us all look at it one more time? Maybe not in a workshop, but at least just get input back.
And just sort of as an overall theme, this is a process where the council has complete discretion. Unlike a conditional use permit where you have to abide by certain standards, there's no obligation to grant these. So to the extent the council thinks of something on the fly and realizes there could be a potential cost, you could, even if the wording isn't in there, you'd say, well, based on these particular circumstances, we think the applicant should contribute this amount of money to, offset the city costs. But certainly putting it into the policy is better.
Okay, any other comments or thoughts? Okay, any input from the audience this evening? Okay, seeing none, then I guess we are adjourned to our regular meeting that will be held this Tuesday, March 18th at 6, with closed session starting at 4 if necessary. We are adjourned.